For Mark Stein. We will be bringing you all of the latest, not just throughout this evening, but for the coming days as well, as our nation pays its final respects to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, who made her last trip into Buckingham Palace, where she will rest in the bow room, surrounded, as I think is right and proper, frankly, by her nearest and dearest, King Charles III, who will be given that final chance to say goodbye to his mother. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining me here, and I hope that you're all OK. It's an emotional time and an emotional evening. I do want to just say that we're going to be handing over to Dan Wootton tonight next for the continued emotional tributes live at Buckingham Palace. Thank you, everyone who's been getting in touch. Just want to finish with a little bit of you, and from Deborah, who says, "Long live the King." A great way to finish this particular share. Now it's your weather.
Hello again and welcome to your forecast with me, Luke Mile. Over the next few days, we've got some rain easing across the southern areas. So for many, it's going to be a dry and much fresher week. Now, that weather front that's been bringing the rain has still got the warm air associated with it. But as we go through the week with high pressure out to the west, it allows the doors to open up to a northerly wind, which will drag in some much fresher air. For the here and now, though, it's a wet evening across southern counties of England, just fringing into the south coast of Wales as well. Some places could see some quite heavy downpours for a time, so some difficult travelling conditions through the night. Elsewhere, though, with clearer skies, we'll see temperatures dipping away, a few mist and fog patches in places, a bit more cloud for Northern Ireland and Western Scotland, with a few showery bits of rain here. But the heaviest of the rain will remain across southern areas. Through the morning, it will continue to just fizzle out, I think, as we go through the day. So by the afternoon, we'll start to see those skies brightening up. And then for many areas, it's actually not going to be too bad a day, with plenty of sunshine around. Temperatures still on the warm side in the south, but feeling that little bit fresher further north, where we've got a bit more of a breeze. And then through Wednesday evening, we'll continue to see that rain pulling away. For most, it's turning dry and clear then. There will be some more cloud drifting in across North Sea coastal areas, but for the vast majority, with those clear skies overnight. A fresher night to come than of late. Temperatures dipping down to low double digits in our towns and cities, but I think in the countryside, we'll see those values dipping down into mid-single figures in a few places, so a chilly start to Thursday morning. Quite a grey picture across some eastern parts of England, but for most places it's dry. There will be some sunshine around, a scattering of showers across northern parts of Scotland through the day, and a bit more of a breeze here. But as we go through the week, we'll start to see that northerly breeze turning a bit more stronger, and those temperatures will start to dip away. Bye-bye.
Live from Buckingham Palace, where in the past hour, Her Majesty came home. Once again, her beloved son and heir, King Charles, was a pillar of strength despite his unimaginable sorrow as he received the late Queen's coffin at her London base, along with senior royals, including the Prince and Princess of Wales. I'll explore how the King won me and a sceptical public by guiding us through our national mourning these past 5 days. That's in my digest next. My superstar panel, Daily Mail columnist Amanda Patel, esteemed political correspondent John Sargent, and author and journalist Rebecca Reid will also reveal if they've changed their minds about Charles. At 9:35, Nigel Farage explores how Her Majesty's death and the accession of Prince Charles has proved left-wing declinists wrong. Plus, how did King Charles manage to win over his biggest critics in just 5 days? And what golden rule must he follow to keep us all on side? Well, Daily Mail columnist Stephen Glover gives his verdict at 10:45. At 9:25, Royal Malstein's Lady Colin Campbell and Phil Dampier salute the great British public as they prepare to brave 35-hour queues to say goodbye to the Queen. And as hospitals cancel appointments, supermarkets shut their doors and Centre Parks chucks out entire families, are certain businesses and organisations going overboard for Her Majesty's funeral? We'll debate at 10. Plus, as a US talk show host defends a critical race theory professor who wished the Queen an excruciatingly painful death. When will the stateside liberal media drop their obsession with the ills of the British Empire? Will top American journalist Megyn Kelly Sally tries to make sense of this reaction at 9:50. And as they reportedly return to the fold to receive the Queen's coffin tonight at Buckingham Palace, will Harry and Meghan follow the advice of their showbiz confidant Oprah Winfrey and rebuild their relationship with the royals? Well, royal biographer Angela Levin weighs in at 10:20. She'll also join me here in just a few moments after we had the privilege of watching the late Queen Elizabeth return to the capital one last time. This is Dan Wootton here until 11 p.m. Now, as we have just seen, Her late Majesty the Queen has arrived at Buckingham Palace for the final time. The Queen's coffin travelled to London by plane after lying at rest in St Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh, where thousands of mourners queued overnight to pay their respects. Meghan Markle and Prince Harry reportedly joined King Charles, the Queen Consort, the Prince and Princess of Wales and Prince Andrew to receive the coffin in an intimate gathering. Our late Queen will spend tonight in the Bow Room in Buckingham Palace, which was of course her full-time residence until earlier this year. The coffin will then be transported to Westminster Hall tomorrow, where she will lie in state for 5 days until the funeral on Monday. Royal biographer Angela Levin is with me now. And Angela, wow, we've just seen history, haven't we? Incredible scenes as the late Queen Elizabeth was driven right behind us into Buckingham Palace. The heavens have now opened here in London. What did you make of it, Angela?
Well, I think it's incredibly moving. I saw it and I thought, I can't believe this. But on the other hand, I'm very pleased she's come home. Of course, poor woman, she doesn't know where she is, of course, but you just somehow want to hold on to them as long as you can. So you sort of personalise them, which helps you feel a little bit better. And she knows Buckingham Palace so well, even though it wasn't her favourite place to stay. No. But it's very good to have her with us, I think. I'm very pleased she's arrived here safely.
And Angela, there were cheers. There was loud cheering from the public. Maybe some would say against protocol, but actually what it shows, I think, is that the British public want to express their support and their love for this woman.
Yes, I think they were very quiet when they first came in and round, and then once she was going inside, huge cheers. And I think they've actually instinctively got it right. Quiet for respect, and then cheers because you love her so much.
Now, literally in the past half hour, Angela, we've already seen King Charles and Camilla leave the palace. The expectation is that they've probably gone to Clarence House, just around the corner, where, of course, all of their belongings and everything remain, even though
to pack.
At some point, exactly, they'll be packing to go into the big house behind us. What did you make of the fact that it looks like Prince Harry and Meghan were there alongside the family today to receive the coffin at Buckingham Palace?
I think they should be. I mean, Prince Harry, whatever he's done, is the grandson of the Queen, and he should be there on his occasions. And although I'm really annoyed with him, and he's a very different man from the man I interviewed when I did his biography in 2018, I think there's a split between actually being with the family when it is so traumatizing for everyone and share the sadness and the rest of his life. But I hope that somehow it will enter into his head that things need to change on his part.
Angela, of course, we're coming up to an extraordinary 24 hours here in London. The Queen will lie in state tomorrow at Westminster Hall. How important do you think it is for the staff at Buckingham Palace tonight? Not just for her relatives, of course, that's incredibly important, but of course the Queen adored her staff. Some of them have been loyal to her over many decades, so I guess there's going to be some very special scenes going on behind.
Yes, I think there'll be a lot of crying. I mean, people don't get so well paid when they work for the royals, but actually they adore it, they adore the job, and they have the same sort of sense of duty to whoever they're with than actually the individual does to the country and the Commonwealth. I think it's a real, they really are grateful and pleased and feel very honoured that they've had this opportunity to work for her. And I think they will miss her enormously. She was very funny, and they used to know she made everyone laugh. She was very kind, and if something was wrong and something was ill, she would sort it for them, or she'd get someone to. So she was beyond just a boss. She was rather like a grandmother, I think.
And then tomorrow she belongs to us again, to all of the British public. Angela Levin, you're going to be staying with us throughout the night here at Buckingham Palace. Thank you so much, Angela. Of course, the royal biographer, the biographer of Prince Harry as well. We are here live at Buckingham Palace until 11 p.m. with all the latest coverage as King and country continue to mourn our late King. But to round up what has been another extraordinary day in British history, the news with Simon Pusey.
Good evening from the GB newsroom. I'm Simon Pusey. The Queen's coffin has arrived to cheers at Buckingham Palace, having been driven in a state hearse through central London. The plane carrying the coffin landed at RAF Northolt just before 7 o'clock, following a lie-in in rest in Edinburgh. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon said Scotland has bid a final farewell to our much-loved Queen of Scots. At Buckingham Palace, the coffin was due to be received by a guard of honour, then carried to the Bow Room, where it will remain overnight. The hearse has been designed in consultation with the late monarch to allow members of the public to have a clear view of the coffin. King Charles and the Queen Consort have left Buckingham Palace following the arrival of the Queen's coffin. The new King and his consort have been in Belfast meeting the Northern Ireland Assembly and taking part in a service of prayer and reflection at St Anne's Cathedral. Meanwhile, the Princess Royal, who's accompanied the coffin on its flight from Scotland to London, has called it an honour and privilege to accompany her late mother on her final journeys. In other news, the family of the man fatally shot by police last week are asking to be shown video footage of his final moments. 24-year-old Chris Cabber, who was unarmed, was killed during a police pursuit after they deliberately crashed into his car to stop the vehicle. One shot was fired from a police weapon. A firearms officer has now been suspended. The Independent Office for Police Conduct has opened a homicide investigation. London Mayor Sadiq Khan says due process must be followed.
There's an independent police investigation from the independent police watchdog. They will go wherever the evidence is. They decided there should be a homicide investigation, and I support that. But the new commissioner has made a really important decision, which is to suspend the officer, and I fully support that. And we've got to give them the time to do their investigation properly, because how would the family and others feel if that investigation couldn't happen properly because of a speed in making sure they get answers sooner rather than later?
A funeral has been held for Archie Battersby. The 12-year-old who'd suffered a brain injury died last month after a judge ruled the doctors could stop providing life support. Hundreds of mourners attended the funeral wearing black with some purple at the request of his family. The service in Southend in Essex was a celebration of his life and featured videos of him singing and performing gymnastics. The Ukrainian president says his country is now in full control of more than 4,000 square kilometers of territory, having recaptured it from Russian forces. President Volodymyr Zelensky has also said his armed forces are attempting to secure an additional 4,000 square meters. Meanwhile, Ukraine has restored two main power lines supplying the eastern city of Kharkiv after Russian shelling caused blackouts, whilst the three backup power lines at the Russian-held Zaporizhia nuclear power plant have also been restored. An MP who broke COVID rules has been ordered to complete a community service payback order. Former Scottish National Party member Margaret Ferrier admitted putting the public at risk by travelling from London to Scotland in 2020, knowing she had the virus. Imposing the order, Sheriff Principal Craig Turnbull said she willfully ignored the rules. She now has to complete 270 hours of unpaid work within 9 months. And the former heavyweight boxing champion Anthony Joshua has accepted the terms for a proposed fight with Tyson Fury. The World Boxing Council champion made the offer last week, saying he'd accept a 60-40 split. The highly anticipated Battle of Britain bout will be held on the 3rd of December. This is GB News.
she's home. In the last hour, just behind my shoulder, the late Her Majesty the Queen, who I'm going to now refer to as Elizabeth the Great, returned to Buckingham Palace. Tonight, she will rest at her official London residence since the death of her father for the first time, before she officially lies in state from tomorrow. In another historic day, the new king travelled to Northern Ireland as his mother left her beloved Scotland. Tomorrow, London is expected to become full as hundreds of thousands, potentially even 1 million folk, queue to see the late Queen's coffin. Meanwhile, highly significant new YouGov polling released today reveals an unprecedented surge in support behind the new king. In March, this is really interesting, just 39% of us predicted Charles would be a good ruler, while 31% thought he would be bad in the role. But within days of his mother's death, the public's evaluation has completely flipped. Now, 63% think he will be a good king, with only 15% saying he will do a bad job. Despite Republicans desperately hoping the late Queen's death would lead to a re-evaluation of our political system, support for the monarchy remains stable at 62%, with just 21% calling for a revolution. Even Camilla, who the public, and yes, I'll admit that includes me, have harboured significant doubts about becoming Queen, now has the support of the majority, with 53% saying she will do a good job and only 18% believing she will be a bad Queen. And as I write in a new column tonight for the Mail Online, I'm happy to admit I'm one of those Brits who has changed my mind on our new King Charles, deep in his own incalculable grief for his mama. And I think that has given the British public a way to connect with him that is deeply emotional and convincing. While his mother is peerless, I feel what Charles has done with the FaceTime, the hugs, and even the kisses is reach out to the public in a way that suggests he will be a more hands-on monarch. His work ethic this week has been truly phenomenal. Like a force of nature, the 73-year-old knows he's been waiting his entire life for this moment, and nothing will hold him back now. And it's made a difference. On the biggest stage he will ever have, Charles has been pitch perfect. From pledging to remain apolitical and stop campaigning for controversial issues in his King's speech, to taking control of the wayward members of his family, there hasn't yet been one misstep. Of course, it's early days. The challenges ahead for Charles are seismic, but it's incredible to think how much has changed in just 1 week. Last Tuesday, Queen Elizabeth the Great met her new Prime Minister, Liz Truss. 7 days later, she lies in her coffin at Buckingham Palace, and Charles is the new king, widely supported by the British public. To respond now, I'm joined by my superstar panel, the Daily Mail columnist Amanda Patel, the political journalist John Sargent, and the author and broadcaster Rebecca Reed. Amanda Patel, look, I understand that it's only week 1 and there's a long way to go. But for me, King Charles has allayed so many of the doubts I previously had. Do you agree?
I agree totally, Dan. I've not been a fan of his, as is well documented in my column, and especially not of Camilla. But there's just been something so poignant about watching the coverage over the last few days. You know, that beautiful sunshine in Scotland and in Northern Ireland. And then it's almost as though when she came down to London, it's almost like the sky was weeping and it started to rain softly. You know, the whole thing is, it's almost like some kind of movie. And I have to say that I was finally tipped by watching Charles's speech, where he said, he said, his darling mama, he hoped that she would may flight on angel's wings, and to her rest. And you just think, it was so beautiful. He's done this incredible balance of respecting the public and their love for her, and his absolute commitment that he will continue the work that she's done. And we kind of believe him, but also expressing his great loss for his mother. I just think he's, you know, I mean, a movie director couldn't have written this better. It's just been beautiful.
It has been magical. I mean, John Sargent, look, the reason why I wanted to talk about Charles today and be very honest is because, like Amanda, I have had significant doubts. I still think there are big tests ahead for our new king. For example, on Saturday, when he went in to meet the opposition leaders, Ed Davey, who is the leader of the Liberal Democrats and was the Energy and Climate Change Secretary for about 5 years, said, "Oh, I do want to speak to you again, Your Majesty, to discuss issues regarding climate change." And number one, I thought, what a weird thing to say to a man who has just lost his mother as your opening gambit, but put that to one side. What I hope King Charles will now say to Ed Davey is, no, that's no longer appropriate, Mr. Davey. I am the monarch. I'm not going to be engaging in political campaigning.
Speak.
John Sargent.
Oh, right. No, I didn't know whether you were just pausing.
Was there a question there, Dan?
No, the point is that we've all really had a lesson, haven't we, in the importance of monarchy, how our constitution works, how difficult it is. And I think lots of people are casually saying, oh, let's skip a generation, go to William, all this sort of talk. And then when you've seen, as the days have gone on, everyone reinforcing the idea that this is a very difficult, very important job. And they've also noticed that Charles, clearly, the king, now knows what he should be doing. He's been thinking about it for a very long time. And that authority that he's given to it, as if, look, you know, no need to tell me about this job. I really, really know about this job. And I think people have accepted that because, of course, the public, generally, if they're given a proposition, they will think, well, what's fair? Give the guy a go. If you know, they're not immediately going to say, oh, no, he's finished, he's no good, or he's brilliant. Oh, you know, let's see what he's like. And I think people have been genuinely very impressed.
Rebecca Reed, have you been impressed?
Yeah, I mean, I always liked him. Unlike everybody else, I liked the fact that he's been campaigning about climate change since like the 70s. And even if you don't necessarily agree on climate change, the fact that he picked up on something early and cared about it, I think his work with his company, which Duchy Original, all of those things I think are great and lovely. And I've always felt very sympathetic about Camilla. I think it's actually quite a beautiful love story. I mean, I was like 5 or 6 when Diana died, so I didn't have that connection with her, so probably it's easier for me to suspend the sort of wrongs against her. But yeah, I always liked him. I think he's done a great job. I also think if you like the monarchy, you can't pick and choose. It's not really how it works. You can't be like, I'd like Princess Anne in charge, and then I'll have Prince George, and then I'll have a Charlotte on the side. It's not really the game, is it?
But Dan, Rebecca makes a really good point here, in that I think that what has happened now is suddenly the shadow of Diana has shifted away from Charles and Camilla. And, you know, I was Team Diana for all that time. I'm a lot older than... Diana was only 3 or 4 years younger than me.
So was I. No, so was I.
So I grew up believing this fairy tale, believing the broken heart. And then suddenly, I was just struck today thinking it was Diana's 25th anniversary of her death, only 9 days before the Queen died. And I never again thought that we would see these kind of crowds in the street. In fact, I feared that maybe the Queen, there might be a few bouquets, there might be a few people, but this totally eclipses what happened with Diana. And I feel as though the world has kind of moved to a different place. There isn't the hysterics, there aren't people throwing themselves on the flowers like they did for Diana. It's just seas of flowers, you know, oceans of people who are full of grief and goodwill, and as it turns out, goodwill for Charles
and
Camilla, who I
yeah.
used to detest.
I think also the point is that people now see the seriousness of all this. You can have the soap opera going on and on and on about who likes this and who's done that and who's broken with that. I'm reminded of a made-up conversation between a possible, it's not logical. And the Englishman says, yeah, it's in theory, it shouldn't work, but it does in practice. And we've seen that sort of extraordinary way in which once you've got all these people and all talking in the way they have been talking, this endless coverage, I think people have just thought, this is big business, isn't it? It's not soap opera, it's not daft, this is real, these people are doing it, and I think that's had a very profound effect on what people think about the monarchy, and they're not so casual about saying, oh, as you say, let's have this, why can't we do this, and why can't we skip a generation? You either accept the idea, a strange
I think you're right, and it's only once you see Prince Charles
and you realise that all these people are they're very affected by their loyalty to the Queen and their belief in how good she was for the country and how good she was for them as individuals, and that's quite a revelation.
And hoping Charles to do the same. With Camilla by his side. I never thought I'd say that sentence.
And I think it's only been once you see Prince Charles as king that all of a sudden it feels right. Because as I say, I didn't feel this way 7 days ago. The vast majority of the British public didn't feel this way 7 days ago. And I think, John, you're right. The British public didn't feel this way 7 days ago. And I think, John, you're right. That's why this system works. But thank you so much. My superstar panel are here with me all night. Daily Mail columnist Amanda Platel, the political journalist John Sargent, and the author and broadcaster Rebecca Reid. Now, let's move on, though, because, of course, they will be with us for the rest of the night. But today, the man who heckled Prince Andrew as he walked behind his mother, the late Queen's coffin in Edinburgh, has been arrested and charged in connection with a breach of peace. The police's treatment of anti-monarchy protesters in the wake of the Queen's death has prompted concerns about freedom of speech, even in this period of official national mourning. Mark, I'm joined now by GB News' home and security editor, Mark White. Mark, look, I'm a free speech fundamentalist. Of course, I thought that protest yesterday was unsavoury. I haven't thought any of the protests have been particularly well judged. However, I don't think it's right that these people are being arrested. We do have to be able to have a democratic debate in this country. Now, I believe you've got breaking news on this.
Yeah, I think in part prompted by that incident in Edinburgh and another number of small protests, Scotland Yard have issued a statement tonight in which they are saying, we know there are some people who want to protest on a range of issues, even at this time of national mourning. It goes on to say that people have a right to freedom of expression, exactly as you say, Dan, and we must balance the rights of protesters with those of others who wish to grieve and reflect. So I think Scotland Yard is really trying to emphasise that they will, as much as they can, try to allow for legitimate protest. The difficulty we have, though, is that there is a massive security issue here, big security concerns as we lead up to the state funeral, in which many world leaders will be here. It is a time when the security services know there is a potential for people to try to make a statement in a way that is much more destructive. So they have to balance that out.
Well, indeed, because I think, Mark, there has to be a very different line taken on the eco-terrorists, for example, of the Extinction Rebellion, some of whom we know are planning to disrupt the Queen's funeral route. Now, to me, that would be criminal damage. It's very different to a peaceful protest by a Republican.
Yeah, I think if you get to direct action, you're really sort of crossing over into an area where you can expect to find that you're going to be dragged away. Some people have done that already, that have tried to jump in front of, just the other day in the Mall just behind us there, as the King's motorcade was about to head off to Clarence House, someone jumped into the Mall, was tackled and taken away. Understandably, because what we've seen in the past, people that actually want to enact some level of violence, it starts with shouting and screaming, and you think, okay, it's a noisy protest, and it develops into something else. So you can understand why the police will be on edge, will be on alert.
It's a very fine line. But when it is a sole individual not making any real noise or breaking the law in any way, I think they do have a right to protest. However, what I would say, Mark, is people should be warned, because this is a funeral. A lot of us are feeling grief. And if in that procession there are idiots who decide to make a huge song and dance and protest, you're going to expect to be tackled, probably to the ground, quite forcefully by the great British public. And that's the risk that you take.
Well, interestingly, the incident in Edinburgh, that's exactly what happened. A member of public grabbed him effectively by the scruff of the neck, and you could see him just being hauled backwards. So, yes, you're right. People are not going to react well to this. I think the difference with Edinburgh, where it is an issue that really crosses into the rights of freedom of speech, is that, okay, you can take someone away who's causing a disturbance, potentially a threat, but then to charge them afterwards, you are making a judgment call as a police service and as prosecutors that actually someone who, however distasteful it might be, is expressing their freedom of speech.
This isn't North Korea. This isn't China. You are a scumbag if you want to disrupt the Queen's funeral. I don't think you're a criminal. And that's where our police have to be very careful over the next few days.
100%.
And actually, all it ends up doing, Mark, is turning people to the Republican cause anyway, because as a country, this isn't a big debate. It's a very small minority of people. Have your protest, but I would say just be respectful to the people who are genuinely mourning, because we are genuinely mourning as a country, and you would not interrupt someone's relative's funeral, would you?
No, without a doubt. And I mean, it was absolutely distasteful and appalling that someone should shout as the body of the late monarch passes, supported and followed by their bereaved children, our bereaved children.
I know.
But as you say, they have a right.
But you're not a criminal.
You have a right to be a scumbag.
And of course, the Queen absolutely believed in the right to this form of protest. She believes that Republicans, or she believed that Republicans have a right to express their view. And we are Britain. We are a great democracy. And so I think the police have been very heavy-handed over the past couple of days. And I say this obviously as one of the biggest royalists in
we
this
fought world wars to defend that. We're very right.
Indeed. Well, Mark White, thank you for that breaking news. Tonight, our Home and Security Editor live with me at Buckingham Palace. Now, to react off the back of that, and joining me now, the esteemed royal writers, Lady Colin Campbell and Phil Dampier. So it has been an incredibly emotional night, Lady C. The Queen now lies right behind me in Buckingham Palace. What sort of emotions do you think will be going on inside Lady C? Because, of course, there are so many courtiers who have spent years and years and decades, in some cases, serving the late Queen Elizabeth II.
I know some of them are grief-stricken because she wasn't only their boss, she was their friend. I mean, some of the ladies in waiting, for instance, have been with her for decades, literally decades. And some of the courtiers have dedicated their whole lives. But also, of course, the whole of the family is there now. And my understanding is that certain members of the family have gone down like a lead balloon. And, the whole situation is extremely tense, but everybody wants, most people want that unity be shown to exist and that any differences are papered over. But of course, everybody is sad, I would imagine, except for one individual who uses everything as a marching exercise, and I can't imagine that she's sad, but everybody else is sad, including her rather pathetic husband, to put it like that. And certainly where the friends and the courtiers are concerned, yes, there is genuine grief. Absolute grief, and I mean, Princess Anne made it very clear how honored she was to accompany her mother. I mean, the Queen's children and grandchildren love her, which is what makes Harry's behavior even more mystifying. It's extremely perplexing that he hasn't yet come to his senses. But I suppose if you are addicted to another individual, aside from anything else, what comes first is the substance to which you're addicted, whether it be a human being or something else.
Lady C, she's not holding back tonight, Phil Dampier. One thing that I will say that is particularly interesting, in the past hour we have seen King Charles and Camilla leave Buckingham Palace, so they were not there for long reuniting with Harry and Meghan, if indeed they were at the palace as has been reported, Phil.
Oh, good evening, Dan. I think we've been reading too much into it to think that they left the palace early tonight because they didn't really want to mix with Harry and Meghan. I think they probably left because they're absolutely exhausted. I was looking at Charles today when he was sitting in the service in Northern Ireland, and at one point I thought he was going to drop off to sleep. His eyes started to droop a bit. And as we've said before, he's 74 in a couple of months, and the schedule has been absolutely relentless. And I expect they're absolutely exhausted, and I expect they've gone back to Clarence House to get some rest and to get an early night, because we've got another massive day tomorrow with the procession. So, and then of course he's off to Wales when he finally goes to the last part of the kingdom. So, but to be a fly on the wall in Buckingham Palace tonight with Harry and Meghan there and all the other royals paying their respects. I mean, it must be a very, very difficult situation for William and Kate and for some of the others after a lot of what's been said. And I don't disagree with Lady C on her views about Harry and Meghan, but I mean, I'm sure the family are doing their best to be polite to each other tonight, and probably just having a couple of drinks and toasting the Queen and trying to come together. So it's a very difficult situation for everyone. I expect we'll see Harry tomorrow walking behind the I'm not sure if it's government carriage or a hearse in this session, but walking behind the coffin with his brother and other members of the royal family, and obviously he'll be at the funeral. So. A difficult situation, but at the moment they're putting on a united front in public.
Lady C, I think Phil makes a very fair point regarding King Charles, because the bloke has worked non-stop while trying to deal with this interminable grief. And I'm not actually going to show the video tonight, Lady C, because I don't think it's fair, but he's actually copying a lot of abuse online about the fact that he was annoyed regarding a pen at the ceremony earlier today. And I just think, lay off this guy. He's just lost his mum. He's been working non-stop. It was a momentary lapse, and I think the criticism has actually been highly uncalled for.
Well, I think it's actually preposterous. Why would people criticise him? I mean, most people, of course, who are criticising him have never used a fountain pen in their life. And they don't understand that a fountain pen that leaks not only damages the document, but it dribbles ink all over you and possibly all over your clothes. It is extremely irritating. And I will say one thing in defense of the king, that he is quick to anger, but he is a very warm and kind and loving and conscientious person. And if he shows his annoyance, that is simply the fact that he is honest, forthright and forthcoming. And why wouldn't he be annoyed? I would put it to you that practically anybody else in his shoes would have been annoyed, aside from the fact that he is dog tired. I know this from people who or close to the situation. He is totally wrung out. And not only is he totally wrung out, but he has to be making extremely important political moves and speeches. You know, it wasn't easy to go to Belfast and strike the right notes throughout. Look at the way he waded into the crowds. You know, I mean, I'm sorry. We have much to praise him for and nothing to criticize him for. Just because he was annoyed that the pen was leaking, the pen shouldn't have been leaking. You know, it's as simple as that. But everybody, there's a segment of the population that loves to condemn and does it, quite frankly, ill-advisedly and sometimes plain, plumb stupidly.
Phil Damper, I actually think every point Lady C has just made is completely fair enough, actually, because the thing is, King Charles is a man who is very aware of the history of this moment. So he wants everything to be perfect. He has been planning, Phil, his entire life for this week.
Yes, another pen and ink over a pen and ink, isn't it, Dan? We talked about it the other day. The keeper of the pens is obviously going to be sent to the tower over this one. But as you say, it's blown up out of all proportion. It's an absolute, complete non-event. I've always hated fountain pens. That's because I'm left-handed like Prince William. And you see, we always write in a very strange way with our hand round the other corner and smudge it if you don't have your hand round. So I've always hated fountain pens, and I sympathise and never liked them. But he would have been a little bit upset. But I'm sure, as Lady C says, he's a bit tired, a bit tetchy. And it was just one of those moments. But it really is the things that people say on Twitter and the absolute way they blow things up out of all proportion is just ridiculous. And let him get on with the job. He's got some very serious things to do. And now there's going to be a big day, so let's just forget all about it.
No, I think you're completely right. And of course, Phil, you won't be surprised to know it is the American news networks who are blowing it all out of proportion, and they seem to have a very anti-British agenda going on at the moment. But thank you so much to our esteemed royal writers, Lady Colin Campbell and Phil Dampier, for your invaluable insight as always. They'll be back again with us tomorrow as we continue our historic coverage of the death of Queen Elizabeth II. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the show, according to a brand new YouGov poll, the popularity of King Charles has skyrocketed, with 63% of Brits now saying he will make a good king, up 30 points from the previous survey in May. Despite this groundswell of public opinion, a vocal minority are claiming that the monarchy is in decay for some reason. But in a column for the Daily Telegraph, journalist Daniel Johnson stresses that, quote, left-wing declinists are blind to the enduring power of our monarchy, and the prospect of its dissolution, quote, comforts those in the woke camp who hate everything about our country. Well, Nigel Farage joins me now. Nigel, we might not have expected this, but the past few days, I reckon, it may have actually strengthened the institution of the monarchy in Great Britain.
Well, deeper than that, Dan, actually, what's happened in the last few days is, for the first time in most of our lives, we've begun to understand what a constitutional monarchy actually is. We haven't seen these events, these ceremonies, in 70 years. And I think many of us now realise the wisdom of not slimming down the royal family to sort of just riding around the place on bicycles, as many of the Scandinavian-style monarchs seem to do. We're learning the importance of it. We're understanding that things like lying in state, all of it, involves the public too. It isn't just all pomp and circumstance. There is a big public element involved in this. And I've got to say, honestly, that over the years, Charles and I haven't always seen eye to eye. We've had one or two face-to-face conversations, Dan, that I'm not going to repeat at this moment in time, over which we have disagreed on things. But he has been brilliant. Brilliant. I mean, you can see the distress that he's under. He's an emotional man. He wears his heart on his sleeve. But I mean, look, I mean, just think about today. He starts off in Scotland. He goes to Northern Ireland, where even one word, I mean, forget the pen, for goodness sake, but even one word out of place would lead to all sorts of protest and difficulty. He then comes back, and there he is at Buckingham Palace, at the head of the royal family, receiving his mother's body back through those gates of Buckingham Palace for the last time. I mean, you know, the hours he's worked, the effort he's putting in, the dignity that he's showing, but there's also a great humanity about the way he's doing this. You know, every one of us who's even got a little bit of a heart can see he is distressed, he is upset, but he's going about this, he's carrying out his duty in full public glare. Can anyone watching this programme or listening to it right now say that they would be equal to that?
No, I know. I completely agree, Nigel. And look, the point is, I think how we feel about King Charles this week is how the majority of the public feel, as that YouGov polling shows. I mean, there has been a complete turnaround. And perhaps, Nigel, it was just that we needed to see King Charles in the job. We needed to hear him set out his stall in terms of what he planned to do as king. And of course, for us, it was very important that he made that vow that he would not be a campaigning king. In his speech, he will be apolitical. And then I think, Nigel, it's the humanity, isn't it? It's the fact that he wants to be a king up close and personal with his subjects.
Yes, it'll be a different style to Elizabeth. I mean, you know, she comes from a different generation. That generation were much more buttoned up, perhaps, than, you know, Charles will be, or, you know, or you or I would be. Not that we ever will be. But, you know, what I've seen, I mean, I was in Green Park today. I was outside Buckingham Palace this morning. And I've really felt there is a warmth and admiration for Charles, the way he's handled it. And above all, you know, Dan, what's really struck home is that King's speech, that first speech to the nation. People could see that he was fighting back tears, and yet he pledged himself for the rest of the time that God gave him to do his duty and to try to live up to the expectations that his mother would have had. And that was so real. It was so human. I'm much more optimistic about the future of the monarchy than I've been before. And I think the Brits now realise that what was created back in 1688, following the Civil War, following the Glorious Revolution, our way, our system, the monarch in Parliament, we saw it writ large yesterday when he walked into Westminster Hall, to the assembled houses of the Lords and the Commons. Dan, for me, without being political, but for me, that was everything I spent 25 years fighting for. Our way, our system, our unique form of government, a constitutional monarchy that, frankly, is the envy of the world. And you are there right now, outside Buckingham Palace. You're surrounded by the world's media, and they're looking on at what is happening in awe, and actually even with a touch of jealousy.
Very true, absolutely. Nigel, it's of course a very emotional night here at Buckingham Palace. Her Majesty the Queen Elizabeth II has returned home. How do you think London is going to react tomorrow when there is the procession of the coffin down to Westminster Hall, her family expected to march behind? These are going to be incredible scenes, aren't they?
Yes, I mean, I've been 4 times to Buckingham Palace since the sad announcement at 6:30 last Thursday. What I've been struck by with every visit, despite the enormity of the crowds and the long staking queues wishing to pay their floral tributes, I've been struck with the silence. As the coffin in the hearse approached tonight, there was applause and a bit of cheering. I was surprised by that, but I think it was emotional relief, frankly, of people feeling, actually quite down, and the rain was coming and all the rest of it. Tomorrow at 2:22, that's the time that the gun carriage will leave the front gate of Buckingham Palace to make its way to Westminster Hall, and behind that will be the Queen's 4 children and other members of the royal family. And I think, as it makes its procession up the Mall, over Horse Guards, down Whitehall, and into that amazing 900-year hall at Westminster, I think tomorrow will be one of the most emotional days of this whole journey. There'll be no clapping, there'll be no cheering, and I doubt there'll be a dry eye in the House.
Nigel, we are a bit shell-shocked as a country right now, aren't we? I mean, how do you feel that it was only 7 days ago when Her Majesty the Queen, or the late Her Majesty the Queen, welcomed our new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, to Balmoral. Truss returned to Downing Street. She gave her first address on the steps of Number 10. It feels like a different world, doesn't it? So much has happened in just 7 days.
Yes, or indeed 3 months ago, when it was the Platinum Jubilee. When I was there on the GBNews stand, when she came out in that bright green outfit onto the balcony for the last ever time, her first time, of course, being VE Day. I mean, can you even believe I'm saying that? And the RAF planes came over, you know, they marked 70 in the sky. But it was funny, you know, even at the Platinum Jubilee, and there I was watching that as you show this picture, so delighted to see her. But we all knew it was never going to happen again. We all knew, even though we tried to convince ourselves that she was immortal, we all knew we'd never see that scene again. And I'm so pleased that I was there on that day. Tomorrow is going to be, obviously the funeral will be the biggest thing that's probably ever happened in this country. But I think tomorrow will be, I think tomorrow's going to be the most somber moment of all of this. I really, really do.
I know, it's going to be hard. It is going to be hard. It has been one hell of a week. Nigel Farage, thank you for your incredible coverage throughout the week, Nigel, and we'll be watching, of course, at 7 o'clock tomorrow night. Thank you, Nigel. Now, I've been updating you all week on some of the attacks on Her late Majesty the Queen from the US liberal media, and sadly, they've not stopped yet. Last week, as the world awaited updates on Her Majesty's condition, Uju Anya, an extremist US critical race theory professor, saw it fitting to post this tweet before the social media platform took it down. She wrote, "I heard the chief monarch of a thieving, raping, genocidal empire is finally dying. May her pain be excruciating." Now, while you'd hope any decent and respectful person would condemn that sort of comment, the US panel show The View sunk to a new low this week when its presenter Sunny Hostin defended those comments. So I'm going to show you that now, and also a reminder of some of the other nonsense that has been spouted by CNN and MSNBC over the past few days.
Can mourn the Queen and not the empire.
Yeah.
Because if you really think about what the monarchy was built on, it was built on the backs of Black and brown people. And right now, Charles now is in a position, I think has 14 colonies that he is now head of state. It's time for him to modernize this monarchy, and it's time for him to provide reparations to all of those colonies. And I also think, you know, a monarchy, it's very easy to uplift one family. The harder thing is to uplift all families.
You can see Harry get out first, then you saw Meghan, and then the other two royals as well.
Andrew, are you really denying what I just said about British colonialism? Are you really doing that, Andrew? Are you really doing that?
We abolished slavery.
Andrew, this is not a propaganda show.
Before you did. I'm certainly taking issue with your remarks about slavery, which we abolished 32 years before you did, and we didn't have to kill 600,000 people in a civil war over it.
The wealth of this empire was derived on the back of the people of their empire.
On display in the palace.
Right, on display everywhere, and in the crown and everywhere.
I'm joined now by my good friend Megyn Kelly, host of the Megyn Kelly Show. Megyn, why is the liberal media, where you are, trying to link the life of Queen Elizabeth II with seemingly every ill of the British Empire, when actually the late Queen was the woman who transformed the British Empire into the Commonwealth? It doesn't make sense to me.
It's envy.
it's identity politics and it's ignorance. You know, they're complaining in particular about this diamond in the Queen's crown, and it's part of the crown jewels, and it has been for a long time now, since the mid-1800s when the British Empire got it from India. And they're saying that must go back. It was the product of plunder. Well, I took a little look just to see. Was it the product of plunder? Well, it turns out that there was a man named Lord Dalhousie, a Scottish statesman and Governor General in India, who allegedly coerced the Indian leader into gifting it to Queen Victoria. Now, the kid was only 11 years old, so perhaps there was coercion. How do we know he coerced it? Well, he wrote it, the Lord did, in a letter bragging about how he got it for Queen Victoria. Well, do we know whether he in fact coerced it, or do we think he might have just been boasting about his overly important? We have no idea because it happened 150 plus years ago. Right? So let's go back a little further. Did India come by the diamond? Honestly, I don't know. A simple Google search told me that it used to belong first to the Iranians, and then their Shah was murdered, and suddenly it showed up in Afghanistan, and then their king was murdered, and suddenly it showed up in India. So how many generations do we need to go back and do right by when we figure out where this diamond must eventually rest? Who among its prior holders has absolutely clean hands? You see, it's really hard to tell, Dan, because it happened hundreds of years ago, and none of us knows the true lineage or how one thing wound up precisely going from one person to the other. Right now, when it was in the hands of India, this particular area actually used to be Pakistan. So Pakistan's saying that they have a right to it. This is the problem when you try to do this weird revisionist history demanding reparations and to return things to their natural state, 200 years ago? Or should we do 300 years ago? Who's that going to upset? We're wrestling with this right here in our own country now, where people like Sonny Hostin want reparations for American African Americans as well, even though there's no way of tracing virtually every single white person. Where did we come from? Did we come from slave owners, or people like me who are Irish who had nothing to do with the slave trade? Or black people, did they descend from slaves or didn't they? Are they immigrants who came well after the slave trade was over? We have no idea. Now, when you do it the other way around, when you come out as the biographer of record for, let's say, Martin Luther King, and you won awards for your reporting on him, and you get one of the biggest leaks of the century, and you find out that MLK was actually present for a massive, disturbing sexual abuse of one of his female congregants, and not only did not stand up to stop it, but seemed to be totally fine with it, that you cannot cancel MLK, and you cannot talk about him. And on MLK Day, it's not important to remember the full legacy of the man, because that's what's honest. No, that gets swept under the rug by people like Sonny Hostin. But when it's Queen Elizabeth who has the wrong, skin color, the wrong history, because she's British, it's fair game. And whether you're a university professor or a moronic television host on the stupidest show on TV, The View, you can get away with it as long as the target doesn't check certain boxes.
Very well put, Megan. Very well put. The other one that really surprised me, right, was Christiane Amanpour from CNN. Now, she's a CBE, Megan. So here she is talking about the need for reparations and the fact that our British Empire was such a terrible thing. She's a CBE. Do you know what that stands for, Megan? A Commander of the Order of the British Empire. Didn't seem to have any problem accepting that little gong, did she?
Of course not, right? She is one of the worst offenders, and Sonny Hostin the same. These are two people who see race as the prism through which they want to view everything, or identity politics in general. You know, Sonny Hostin, let's not forget, was the person who sat there and held up the sign that read, "Hands up, don't shoot," after one of the police-involved shootings that we had over here a couple years ago, involving a white police officer and a black man in Ferguson, Missouri. Well, that was a lie. That black man did not say, "Hands up, don't shoot." He was the aggressor, as told to our Department of Justice by 5 black witnesses. Did Sonny Hostin go on the air and say, "I got it wrong again because my ideological blindfold is on," as it always is when there's anything touching race. I only take one side because I'm blinded by this ideology. No, she did not. And how about that other reporter you showed from CNN referring to Meghan and Harry and the two other royals? Oh, you mean the future king of England? That's how stupid and ignorant the reporters are over here. They only follow the ones who give them the drama they need and say the proper things about the royal family, meaning it has to be horrible, in order for the CNNs of the world to really want to cover them.
No, indeed. Indeed. And obviously, there's a real irony, Meghan, because the US TV networks want to keep on covering this story. They just have to do it in a negative way because, of course, it's great for their ratings. But I think the thing that they're missing when it comes to Queen Elizabeth II, or Queen Elizabeth the Great, as I'm now referring to her, Meghan, is that this was the ultimate feminist. You know, there is so much for the woke, for the left to celebrate about this woman, and they don't seem to want to do it.
And she celebrated both parties. I mean, everyone was praising Elizabeth the Great in the wake of her passing last week, on the right and the left. Show me an American woman who's been in a position of power, a leader, who that's true of. There isn't one. We don't have such a person. That's not really the way our country works. And we've never managed to elevate a woman to a position of power like Queen Elizabeth was in to begin with. So I think it's just power. It's the identity. If Queen Elizabeth had been a black queen, you wouldn't be hearing any of this, right? This is just how people are. And they're too mired in victimhood. I mean, we've had Michelle Obama. She became First Lady of the United States. She went to Princeton undergrad. She went to Harvard Law School. She worked for a very respected law firm in Chicago. She becomes First Lady. Her husband becomes President of the United States. They unveiled her official portrait last week, and his. And she took the moment to point out the people who built this building, you know, in the White House, they never anticipated someone who looked like me would become First Lady. Okay, but you did. And this is the country that made that happen. So maybe now is a time to celebrate the greatness of this country and the fact that we did put you in office and your husband in office for 2 terms in a row. But there is a collection of people, and it's not divided by race. It's not white or black. It's woke and unwoke, and the media is all woke. That sees everything through this identity politics prism. And Queen Elizabeth has the wrong skin color to get their approval. And even if it weren't Queen Elizabeth, because of course, as you know, she wasn't the one presiding over most of the things they were upset over. She's related. She's connected. She's got crowns that have jewels that if we trace the history back 500 years, we might find a way to be offended, which is their bread and butter business these days.
Indeed, Megyn Kelly, host of the Megyn Kelly Show podcast, which is available on YouTube, Sirius XM. Thank you so much, Megyn. I think you put it absolutely perfectly. Of course, by the way, here in the UK, we are now on to our 3rd female Prime Minister, perhaps something that would not have happened if it weren't for Queen Elizabeth II. Megyn, thank you so much. We'll speak next week.
All right. All the best, Dan.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel. I'm Dan Wootton, live from Buckingham Palace, where Her late Majesty has just arrived to rest overnight before her loyal citizens begin paying their respects in Westminster Hall tomorrow. She was received by her devoted son, King Charles, once again showing the incredible fortitude that is winning around his biggest detractors. But just how do you follow Britain's greatest ever monarch? Well, Daily Mail columnist and a frequent critic of the former Prince of Wales, Stephen Glover, advises our new leader on the one rule he must not break if he wants to keep the public on side. That's at 10:45. With queues of up to 35 hours expected to see the Queen lying in state, there's no doubt about the country's reverence for our fallen leader. But as hospitals cancel appointments, supermarkets shut their doors and Centre Parks chucks out entire families, are certain businesses and organisations going overboard for the Queen's state funeral? We're going to debate that next with my superstar panel, the Daily Mail columnist Amanda Patel, the esteemed political correspondent John Sargent and the author and journalist Rebecca Reid. As it's revealed, they joined senior royals, including the King and the new Prince and Princess of Wales, to receive the Queen's coffin. Will the Sussexes follow the advice of their showbiz confidant Oprah Winfrey and rebuild their relationship with the royals? Royal biographer Angela Levin, she of course knows Prince Harry well, weighs in at 10:20. And should Prince Harry be allowed to wear his military uniform at the Queen's final vigil, given an exemption has been made for his uncle Prince Andrew? Join me for that at 10:30. But first, breaking tonight, the government has released the queuing route for mourners to see Her late Majesty the Queen lying in state at Westminster Hall. Huge numbers are already camped out in central London, with expectations that over 1 million people could queue for a chance to pay their respects in front of the late Queen's coffin. Well, GBNews reporter Jeff Moody is at Hyde Park Corner, where the coffin has just passed on its way to Buckingham Palace, where it will, of course, spend the night just behind me. Jeff, what do we know of these new plans released by the government to manage the vast process of national mourning beginning tomorrow?
Well, the very first thing we know is the government advice that what you need to do is find the queue and then find the back of it. Well, we're British, Dan. We certainly know how to sniff out a queue, and we certainly know how to find the back of it. They're suggesting that people head for the corner of Albert Embankment and the Lambeth Bridge, and that's where there will be stewards that will help to guide people to the very end of the queue. So that's where they're suggesting that people start. They're saying that what happens then is the queue will snake along the back of the embankment, down the south embankment, and then it'll go over a bridge and head towards the Palace of Westminster. But the best thing for people to do is to speak to a steward, and they will show you where to go. Now, you will get a wristband, a coloured wristband, when you find the end of that queue. And these wristbands, they're at pains to say, are not interchangeable. You can't just grab 5 wristbands and then the rest of your family join you later. Each wristband is unique to you, and that will allow you to disappear for a little bit, go to the toilet, go and find something to eat and bring back some coffees, but not for long, because the queue will be moving continually, very slowly albeit, but certainly continually, so you can go away for a short period of time. Now, all sorts of advice about, and warnings of course, about how long this is going to take. They're saying it could take hours and hours and hours. You could be here overnight. Very little opportunity to sit down because that queue will be moving pretty much continually. So advice, maybe it's not the most sensible idea to bring children or the elderly with you, because it's going to be constitutionally, your own constitution this time, particularly hard to endure for that period of time. But still, we're expecting hundreds of thousands to do it. There will be a separate route for people who are disabled. There'll be step-free access. So again, the stewards will point you in the right direction. But another diktat from the government has come through in the last half an hour or so, which under normal times I think might be quite irksome, Dan. It's basically a diktat from the government telling us how to behave. Now, I think we should excuse it for this one occasion, because the advice they're giving is very solid advice if we need it. They're saying, antisocial behaviour will not be tolerated. We need to be quiet. We need to be silent as we're filing past the coffin. There will be police patrolling through Westminster Hall to make sure that everyone is being respectful and quiet, and not too much alcohol. They're going to be very conscious of people drinking too much in the queue and maybe making a lot of inappropriate noise once they're there. So this is what the government is telling us to do tomorrow. They are expecting, as I say, hundreds of thousands of people, and the queues have started already, Dan.
GB News reporter Jeff Moody reporting live on those new details just released by the government. Thank you so much. Great work today, Jeff. We'll speak tomorrow. But to round up what has been an emotional and a historic day, the latest headlines with Simon Pusey.
Thanks, Dan. Good evening from the GB newsroom. The Queen's coffin has arrived to cheers from the public at Buckingham Palace, where it will now remain overnight in the palace's bowroom. King Charles and his Queen consort were joined for the arrival by other members of the royal family, including the Prince and Princess of Wales and Duke and Duchess of Sussex. The state hearse has been designed in consultation with the late monarch to give mourners a clear view of the coffin, which has been lying in rest in Edinburgh. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon said Scotland has bid a final farewell to our much-loved Queen of Scots. Meanwhile, King Charles and the Queen consort have left Buckingham Palace following the arrival of the Queen's cortege. The royal couple have been in Belfast, meeting the Northern Ireland Assembly and taking part in a service of prayer and reflection at St Anne's Cathedral. Meanwhile, the Princess Royal, who's accompanied the Queen's coffin on its flight from Scotland to London, has called it an honour and a privilege to accompany her late mother on her final journeys. The government's route of the queue to the Queen's lying in state at London's Westminster Hall has been published. The line, which will be managed by over 1,000 volunteers and police officers, will follow the path of the River Thames and could stretch all the way to southeast London. The lying in state opens to the public at 5 p.m. tomorrow and will be accessible 24 hours a day until the morning of the Queen's funeral on Monday. In other news, the family of the man fatally shot by police last week are asking to be shown video footage of his final moments. 24-year-old Chris Cabba, who was unarmed, was killed during a police pursuit after they deliberately crashed into his car to stop the vehicle. One shot was fired from a police weapon. A firearms officer has now been suspended. The Independent Office for Police Conduct has opened a homicide investigation, with London's Mayor Sadiq Khan saying that due process must be followed.
There's an independent police investigation from the independent police watchdog. They will go wherever the evidence is. They decided there should be a homicide investigation, and I support that. But the new commissioner has made a really important decision, which is to suspend the officer, and I fully support that. And we've got to give them the time to do their investigation properly, because how would the family and others feel if that investigation couldn't happen properly because of a speed in making sure they get answers sooner rather than later?
Sadiq Khan there. A funeral has been held for Archie Battersby. The 12-year-old who'd suffered a brain injury died last month after a judge ruled that doctors could stop providing life support. Hundreds of mourners attended the funeral wearing black with some purple at the request of his family. The service in Southend in Essex was a celebration of his life and featured videos of him singing and performing gymnastics. The Ukrainian president says his country is now in full control of more than 4,000 square meters of territory, having recaptured it from Russian forces. President Volodymyr Zelensky has also said his armed forces are attempting to secure an additional 4,000 square kilometers. Meanwhile, Ukraine has restored two main power lines supplying the eastern city of Kharkiv after Russian shelling caused blackouts, while the three backup power lines at the Russian-held Zaporizhia nuclear power plant have also been restored. And the former heavyweight boxing champion Anthony Joshua has accepted the terms for a proposed fight with Tyson Fury. The World Boxing Council champion made the offer last week, saying he'd accept a 60-40 split. The highly anticipated so-called Battle of Britain bout will be held on the 3rd of December. This is GB News.
Political dignitaries, the Golden Arm,
Welcome back. We are live from Buckingham Palace, where I don't know if you can hear actually, because it is quite loud here, but there is the beautiful sound of a piper outside the palace as the Queen, of course, lies in rest for the final night before she is moved to Westminster Hall, where she will lie in state from tomorrow until the day of her funeral. So it's a very emotional mood here, but I want to get to tomorrow's newspaper front pages now. The Eye leads with an image of the late Queen coming home to Buckingham Palace. Crowds lined the streets as her coffin travelled through London, with many cheering. The Daily Express leads with the former Queen's coffin entering the gates of Buckingham Palace, with the rather poignant title, Home for the Last Time. The Metro's headline, We'll Walk with Gran, as the publication reports that William and Harry will follow the Queen's coffin with King Charles tomorrow as it travels to Westminster Hall from Buckingham Palace. The Sun leads with the Queen's coffin arriving at Buckingham Palace in the rain. The paper writes that she was cheered by King Charles, Camilla, William, Kate, Harry and Meghan. The coffin will stay at Buckingham Palace for the night. And the headline there, simply, Welcome Home, Ma'am. And I have to say, feels spine-tingling emotional here with the piper playing that beautiful music as the Queen lies for the last time tonight just behind me in Buckingham Palace. I'm joined now by my superstar panel, the Daily Mail columnist Amanda Patel, the esteemed political journalist John Sargent, and the author and broadcaster Rebecca Reed. Now, since the late Her Majesty the Queen's death, there has been a swell of discussion and, for some, discontent over businesses closing their doors as a mark of respect. As expected, a bank holiday will take place on Monday for the late Queen's funeral, and some economists are predicting it will knock £2 billion off the country's GDP. This comes as Prime Minister Liz Truss seeks to tackle the cost of living crisis, with inflation sitting at a 40-year record high. I, of course, call it the cost of lockdown crisis. There you go. Meanwhile, major supermarkets, Sainsbury's, Aldi and Asda have all confirmed they will shut up shop on the bank holiday so that staff can pay their respects. And there's concern for hospital patients after the NHS cancelled thousands of appointments and medical procedures, including hip and knee replacements that were due to happen on Monday. However, it's perhaps the unfortunate holidaymakers at Centre Parks who are having to endure the most disruption. Very controversially, the company announced today that it would close all of its UK resorts on Monday, and lodgers were to be ousted from their accommodation just for the day. One customer was told, you're welcome to leave your belongings in your lodge and access your accommodation again from 10 a.m. on Tuesday. But after a huge groundswell of outrage over that, in a news statement released tonight, Centre Parks have U-turned on their decision, saying guests who are not due to depart on Monday will be allowed to stay on our villages. So look, Amanda Patel, this is such a difficult one, isn't it? Because here we are, this is a historic moment. We haven't seen a state funeral of a formerly reigning monarch for 70 years. At the same time, Amanda, these are difficult times for the country. These are difficult times for the NHS. Do you believe everything should be shut down?
No, I don't. And frankly, I think comparing a Centre Park closing with someone having their knee op that they've probably waited 6 months for, and it's been cancelled a year before that and a year before that, I don't think they're comparable. I think the supermarkets are in a difficult position, but why don't they? Logistically, it's a nightmare. But couldn't, for instance, Tesco just open Tesco Expresses and the other supermarkets who have those smaller shops, and let the people who want to work, give them double money for it. But I think it's just almost impossible to negotiate in such a short time. But I've got really so little sympathy for the NHS with people who've gone through COVID. And, some of these people have been waiting years for these operations. But they're an emergency service. They're, you can't imagine the firemen saying, well, on that day, I'm only going to do big fires. I'm not going to put out little fires. Or police saying, I'm not going to disrupt, some domestic violence. I'll only do it if someone gets stabbed. They have a responsibility. And I think especially for so many people who've waited for so long for things that, waiting for a knee operation, not that I've had one, I have to add Dan, before you suggest it, is that, you know, it's a crippling thing to wait for. It's incredibly painful. And I just think it's completely wrong.
John Sargent, you actually think, though, this is historic, this has only happened once in 70 years, we just have to cop this one as a country?
Well, that certainly should be the broad idea, that don't worry too much about money. This is more important than simply saying, oh, we might lose, we might not lose by it. I think that NHS point is a difficult one. And I know, having worked in a large bureaucracy myself, the BBC, there's an awful problem sometimes when these organisations look after their staff, not after their customers. And there's no doubt that Centre Parks were foolish. It's a good thing they retracted quickly. I think, broadly speaking, we should all realise that this is a very strange, very unusual circumstance, and we should all do our best. But that does not involve hurting people in the NHS. It does not involve making things difficult for people. And Amanda's very practical suggestions about let the small express stores open, let the other ones close if they want to.
And let the people who want to work, because there are some people in this country, believe it or not, who don't really care about Monday.
I think the problem is
not a lot,
all these organisations are so worried about being caught on the wrong side of the argument that, you know, and this is a commercial thing. I'm not talking about the government's view of this. There's a commercial incentive to say, make sure that we're on the sort of monarchist side because that's the one that's prevalent and that's the one that matters at the moment. Well, that's not the way to view it.
I think so often at the moment we get into a situation where brands do really silly things because they have a panicky meeting where everyone goes, what will they say on Twitter? What will they say on Facebook? And then they make a sort of scattergun decision based on trying to appeal to people on the internet, which is often wrong. And in reality, you should
Thinking you don't think anything should shut.
I think if you run your own business and you are sad about the Queen dying and you want to close your pub or your shop, you should have every right to. But in reality, you should also have the right to open if you want to make some money. The Queen, Calvin told me off last week because I started talking about what the Queen would want. But I am telling you, I'm not psychic, but I am telling you, she would think it was bonkers that people were going to be asked to leave their holiday. Well, she'd be confused by the concept of Centre Parks anyway. But if we were entering into this conversation, if the Queen knew that people's knee operations were being cancelled, then I think she'd be outraged. My only slight objection is that we all know that there was huge planning for this funeral, Operation London Bridge, all that hoopla. Surely they could have had a conversation about what should shut and what shouldn't, and maybe a learning for when, hopefully, not for a very long time, King Charles dies, we should have some clarity from him before he dies about what's supposed to happen.
I think people had no idea how big this was going to be. I think that, you know, it's, oh, well, what should we do? Let's leave it. Let's think
I
about
guess when you look at the NHS, though, when you look at the NHS, Rebecca Reid, the issue is, what about the doctors and the nurses who want to pay tribute to the Queen? That's why it's been cancelled, isn't it? Some of these non-urgent procedures.
You could not pay any greater tribute to the Queen than by getting on with your job. She was doing her job 48 hours before she died. And the idea that you could miss... One of the things they're going to get rid of is maternity scans. The idea that you could not go in to check that your baby was growing properly because the nurse or the doctor wants to go and sit and watch the funeral at home is laughable. The Queen would think that was ridiculous. I'm sure.
No, I think,
she would think that was silly.
Rebecca, I think you're completely right. She'd be thinking, keep calm and carry on and get back to work.
And do your bloody job.
You know,
also,
and for those lucky enough to be able to take the day off, that's great. But you shouldn't have... The NHS should not be affected, and people should be able to go out and buy food.
But realistically,
and drink.
Surely the thing to do is to say for the hour and a half or 2 hours of the funeral, you can have it on in the staff room, you can have it on at schools, you can have it on, watch it on your phone. Everybody really has access to a screen right now. Watch it that period.
I know John's disagreeing with that, aren't you, John?
Going to be doing.
What did you say, Dan?
You're disagreeing with that, aren't you, John? I think John is a traditionalist on this. John, you actually think there should be more holidays anyway, don't you?
Well, no, that's a wider...
I'm with you on that.
No, the wider point is, why don't we have as many holidays in Britain as they do in France? Therefore, the extra bank holiday is perfectly justified. I'm reminded of a story that David Attenborough tells of going to a school, and he talks to a little boy, and the little boy says to him, you know, you got a question? He says, yes, I've got a question. When you die, will we get a holiday? and Attenborough tells the story, delightful story. But of course, this sort of, what it exemplifies is that how many people don't know how to behave. We've not done this before. So the idea of making it all up as we go along, every now and then you'll get daft things happening, like Centre Parks.
Yeah. But it was also beautiful what you said before, Dan, about the piper playing behind you, because when they're reporting when the Queen was in Balmoral, every morning at 9 o'clock, the piper would play for 15 minutes for her. And then if she had guests also at
oh my goodness,
dusk.
I know. I got goosebumps. They've stopped now, but I was sort of hoping they would go for the rest of the show, and I imagine they will throughout the night, because that is the sort of mood here at Buckingham Palace right now. Amanda Patel, John Sargent, Rebecca Reed do stand by. Now look, I of course understand we are still in a period of mourning for our country's greatest ever monarch, but some of our broadcasters have really been tying themselves in knots with their efforts to appear respectful. So tonight, for example, the BBC confirmed they will delay the launch of the new series of Strictly Come Dancing, which was scheduled for this Saturday, by an entire week, despite it reportedly being one of the Queen's favourite shows. And it's not just the Beeb. Sky has come under fire for cutting gags by the far-left British comedian John Oliver from the UK airing of its stateside talk show last week tonight. Now, I've actually tracked down the comments in question that were deemed beyond the pale. They're not. Have a look.
We need to start with the UK, which is clearly still reeling from the shocking death of a 96-year-old woman from natural causes. It is a big moment which, for some reason, absolutely everyone felt that they had to weigh in on, from Crazy Frog, which tweeted out, R.I.P. the Queen, candle emoji, a tweet that's impossible to read without mentally adding, wing ding 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 ding, bong bong, to Domino's UK, which posted, everyone at Domino's joins the nation and the world in mourning the death of Queen Elizabeth II. Our thoughts and condolences are with the royal family, which I guess is nice, although if the world is mourning, they should maybe tell the US Domino's account, whose most recent tweet as of this taping is, if you're reading this, it means you need pizza, like to confirm. Get your house in order, Domino's! A lady is dead!
I mean, maybe not particularly tasteful, but certainly not something I think that needs to be censored. We're big boys and girls, aren't we? But that actually wasn't the only gag about Her Majesty, or at least the situation at the moment that graced the US airwaves in recent days. Although I actually think this one was a little bit more off colour. So the woke British TV producer Jesse Armstrong certainly failed to read the room at last night's Emmys as he picked up the top prize for the corporate drama Succession. Watch.
Big week for Successions, new king in the UK, this for us. Evidently a little bit more voting involved in our winning than Prince Charles. But
keep it royalist, keep it royalist.
Well, no, I mean, I'm not saying that we're...
It's rather telling, isn't it, that there wasn't much laughter after that so-called joke. Perhaps he should learn to read the room before the next awards ceremony, because I actually think that was a little bit distasteful, if I'm completely honest. It would be nice for him to pay tribute to Queen Elizabeth II, Queen Elizabeth the Great, as I'm now calling her. Now, at the weekend, obviously we saw Harry and Meghan return to the country as the Fab Four greeted crowds taking in condolences from the public outside Windsor Castle in their first public display of unity since March 2020. So, could this be the beginning of what's sure to be a long and arduous healing process for the family? Well, Oprah Winfrey, this is slightly ironic, given she was the one that conducted the infamous Harry and Meghan interview in the first place that sent shockwaves through the monarchy and the world because of all of the allegations of racism, which are false, by the way. But anyway, she has said that she sees this tragedy as an opportunity for peacemaking. Watch.
And when all families come together for a common ceremony, the ritual of, burying your dead, there's an opportunity for peacemaking.
So as it's revealed that the Sussexes did indeed join King Charles and the rest of the royals to receive the late Queen's coffin this evening, the question remains, will Harry and Meghan listen to Oprah's advice and start to build bridges with the family? Well, joining me now to discuss is the top royal author, Angela Levin. She is also Prince Harry's biographer, spent a huge amount of time with him over the past few years. Angela, firstly, I'm sorry, I have to say, Oprah Winfrey, little bit hypocritical, little bit ironic, talking about peacemaking at the funeral, given it was her interview and actually her lack of forensic questioning of Harry and Meghan and their false claims, and let's be honest, some of their lies that actually got us here in the first place, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. I always call it a conversation, not an interview, because as an interview you ask questions, you dig deep and you work it out.
And you see if someone's telling the truth, don't you?
Well, you find out the facts, and if you just let them speak and you then go on to the next thing, and you just go, oh no, and then you go on to the next thing, I think she should be held up against that, really. I think it's appalling. I think it's a bit of a joke that she now wants to muddle in on saying, let's all make friends. And then she'll have another interview with them.
Of course she will.
And they'll
where
talk
she gets
about
the juice about what went on in Buckingham Palace tonight, which is just so grim, isn't it? And obviously what Harry and Charles have been so worried about. What is interesting though, Angela, of course, Oprah is very connected to this couple now. She's in their close circle of friends. So does it give you some hope that maybe Harry and Meghan have now realised there is a need for peace to be declared?
I don't think so. I think you're asking an awful lot of them, and I don't think they want to do what they need to do. It's as if they're not playing the game exactly. They're behaving because it is Harry's grandmother and it's the right thing to do, and they would get such a lot of bad press if they didn't do it. But I don't know that there's much emotion there. Harry loved his grandmother, but he treated her very badly in the last year of her life. He had the Oprah Winfrey interview when Prince Philip, her adored husband of 70 years, was dying, and the royal family had been told that he had no more than 2 weeks to live, but they insisted on going along with the Oprah Winfrey interview, which I thought was callous beyond measure. And then, being invited by the Queen to go to Balmoral, all those things. I don't think they give an inch if they don't have to. I'm very sorry to say this, because when I was with Prince Harry a lot, I thought he was terrific. He was charming, he had his mother's intuition, and he was marvellous with people who were damaged. But I think it's all been squashed out of him by now.
It's so sad, isn't it, when you talk about those final days of Prince Philip's life. They were completely overshadowed for the royal family by the claims in the Oprah Winfrey interview. And actually, when the Queen was on her deathbed, what was all of the talk? What was everyone in the royal family worried about? It was Meghan's interview with The Cut magazine, where she made an implied threat that she is planning at some point to reveal all about her horrible experiences and that she hadn't had to sign any form of agreement. And then, and this is one thing that I really struggle to forget, Angela, I do accept that Harry is absolutely grieving at the moment, but it was in the week of the Queen's death where they briefed out to their favoured media partners, including that odd little bloke, Omid Scobie, who seems to just be their PR guy, that they didn't want to see any member of the royal family on their trip back to the UK because they'd been treated so badly. That was briefed by them.
Yes, I know. It is appalling, actually. And that means there's no real feeling there. And they put themselves first on everything. And they've got a huge grudge, and they're not going to move. They say they're waiting for Prince William to apologise. Well, you think, well, what has he got to apologise?
Yeah.
Surely the apology has to come from you. And the interesting thing in The Cut, the magazine you were just mentioning, about Meghan saying what she can say, she made a sort of slip up because she said, you know, I can say anything I like. But when she was with Oprah, she said, they silenced me. So, you know, you can't have it both ways, can you? You can't be silenced and then be able to say whatever you like. So the whole thing is, it's written down by people who don't look further than ground level. They don't see how other people will think about it. They don't want to know how other people think about it. And they've put themselves in a sort of walk-in victim corridor, which they go in and they come out. One day they can be telling us what to say, who to think, be passionate to those you know and those you don't know, and the other day they're poor victims. So it's all sort of rather sad, actually, I think, because they've got what they wanted. They wanted to move away. They've got 2 children, a home with 16 bathrooms, and they're in a country that they want to be in. So why are they clinging on to their irritation and resentment? It's very, very strange. And of course, it's very hurtful because the royal family don't answer back. They don't want to go into a boxing match, a verbal boxing match. It's completely out of character and not necessary. They shouldn't descend to that level. But it does mean that they cannot respond to what are often serious lies.
Well, indeed. And look, I know this isn't the popular view of the woke mob, and both you and me have been very much criticised this week. But here's the reality of the situation, Angela. Do you know where my sympathy lies? It lies with Charles and Camilla and Kate and William. And I will explain why. They feel like they cannot have private conversations with Harry and Meghan because of a track record that everything they say is going to be leaked to either Gayle King or Oprah Winfrey or that odd little bloke Omid Scobie or some other American news outlet. And the problem is, imagine how difficult that is. Think of what went on in the palace tonight. And I think maybe we do have to read something into the fact that Charles and Camilla left so soon after the coffin arrived because they're very nervous about being in the presence of Harry and Meghan.
So is William. William is very nervous, and you know, they deserve that. Actually, it's such bad behaviour. If you can't trust people within the family who've been very close to you in terms of brothers or mothers or anything like that, actually you're destroying the whole relationship. And once you've destroyed that, it's extremely difficult to bring it back, because to mend a very deep wound takes time. You can't just go in and say, okay, let's forget about that and move on. It's much more serious than that. And will they give it that time? They can't if the royals can't trust Harry. It's just not possible. Or they can't trust Meghan. And I think that's why I think the memoir that Harry's written should be just cut away and not come out. But
I wanted to ask you about that. Yeah, because Tom Bowell was here last night and he revealed on this show that he has sources who say that Harry is demanding the publication still goes ahead in November. Now, that would not give Charles any form of honeymoon period. He wouldn't have even had his coronation by the time the book is released.
I think that's the end of them if they do that, because surely, you know, people will realise this is a very, very hard thing for the family to get over, the death of someone so marvellous and who's been alive for so long. The longer they live, the less you think they're going to die somehow. And actually, it's cruel and difficult, and if they try to make money out of this, they're despicable. But there might be some clause there that they know that they'll get very unpopular and it might stop them. But on the other hand, their love of money, their need to live a very, very rich lifestyle might overcome their feelings.
Angela, finally, I just wanted to touch on something that I've seen online over the past 24 hours, because it's rubbish, and I think it's very important that this myth is dispelled, because for some reason all the Harry and Meghan mob, the Sussex squad as they're called, and they're actually real online bullies, want to paint this picture yet again of Harry and Meghan facing racism from the moment that they entered the royal family, the moment that she came to the country. That is factually inaccurate. The country could not have embraced Meghan any more than we did. I will never forget that wedding day.
Yeah. I was lucky enough to be one of the presenters for CNN for their wedding. I started at 4 a.m, finished at 10 p.m, and it was absolutely amazing. The crowds were cheering, everybody loved her, we all loved her, and that she could not have been more popular. And the fact that the wedding cost £32 million we put to one side because it was so beautiful and the sun was shining. It couldn't have been more wonderful. So it's nonsense. By the way, half an hour ago was waiting here. I got an email from someone saying you're an absolute racist and I know where you are and I'll come and find you.
So you've had some form of death
just
threat?
Now, yes.
Goodness
so,
me.
I mean, I don't take any notice of it really, but anything you say about them, any criticism that you might make, whether it's small or large, you're said to be a racist. Not at all. I don't dislike her because of her mixed race. I don't like her because I don't think she's a nice person. I don't think she's brought out the best in Harry. And if you marry somebody, you want them to bring out the best in you, not the worst in you.
And you know Harry very well.
I knew Harry very well.
You were chosen to write that biography. He actually agreed to spend a lot of time with you, didn't he?
Yes, I followed him for a lot and we had lots of chats at Kensington Palace.
So all of these people who say, oh, you don't know what's going on, you don't know Harry, well, you've spent a lot more time with Prince Harry than virtually any other journalist in the country.
And I really liked him at the time. I mean, I could see he had troubles, he would get irritable, but who doesn't really? We've seen Prince Charles get a bit irritable today.
Yes.
You know, that's
which we can forgive
point.
him for today, can't we?
100%, because he was so stressed inside about, grieving his mother and making sure he's being friendly with everybody, and a very, very hectic time. Must be exhausted. It's quite understandable. In a way, you're quite pleased to see it because it means it's letting out a little bit of tension.
And it's the grief, isn't it? It's the overwhelming grief.
But Harry, he was adorable, really. And now, I mean, he looks so resentful, he's hard. I've always thought that he would want to beat William because when they were small, William was the heir, and it was made very obvious, particularly by the Queen Mother, who would invite William round for tea to talk about it in a gentle way, but not Harry. And I think that there's things there that have been a long time inside him, which now he feels he can win, because he knows he can say things, he can do things when there's no response from the royal family.
Absolutely fascinating. I always love your insight. Thank you so much for being with me here at Buckingham Palace tonight.
Thank you for asking me.
Angela Levin, and of course you'll be back for our coverage of Her late Majesty the Queen's funeral on Monday night. Angela Levin, thank you so much. I want to take a look now at more of tomorrow's historic newspaper front pages. Let's kick off with The Guardian alongside a poignant photo of the late Queen entering Buckingham Palace this evening. The newspaper writes about Boris Johnson's rules on junk food potentially being under threat under Prime Minister Liz Truss, who may introduce new measures on health eating. So, look, fair enough. The Guardian is a Republican newspaper and they are not sticking to the official morning period. As I say, I believe in freedom of speech. That's absolutely fine with me. The Times, though, doing it far more respectfully, leading with a wrap image of the Queen returning to Buckingham Palace for one last time, with part of tonight's touching statement from her daughter, the Princess Royal, Princess Anne, who accompanied her coffin all the way from Balmoral, her place of death, to London. And she said, I was fortunate to share the last 24 hours of my dearest mother's life. It has been an honour and a privilege to accompany her on her final journeys. Led home with the lights of love. That's the headline of the Daily Mirror, which also leads with an image of the Queen's coffin entering Buckingham Palace this evening. Elsewhere, the paper actually uses an endearing photograph of Her Majesty with a marmalade sandwich from her iconic Paddington sketch. As it's revealed, the BBC will play the 2014 kids movie on Saturday, with its 2017 sequel playing later on in the day of the Queen's funeral on Monday. That's a very nice touch, isn't it? The Daily Telegraph leads with the final homecoming and tells how the royal family will be allowed to grieve in private as the Queen's coffin rests overnight in the palace before Her late Majesty lies in state from tomorrow. It's not too late to change rigid plans and let millions more of us bid the Queen farewell, urges the journalist and filmmaker Robert Hardman on the front of the Daily Mail as the Queen returns home to her family. My superstar panel back with me now, the Daily Mail columnist Amanda Patel, the political journalist John Sargent and the author and broadcaster Rebecca Reid. Now tonight, a spokesperson for the Duke of Sussex has confirmed he will wear a mourning suit rather than his military uniform for remaining events honouring his late grandmother Queen Elizabeth II. They said Prince Harry's, quote, decade of military service is not determined by the uniform he wears, and we will respectfully ask that focus remain on the life and legacy of Her Majesty. Now, the tail end of that statement is a reference to the controversy sparked by the revelation that Falklands veteran Prince Andrew will be allowed to wear military uniform when he joins the rest of the Queen's siblings at the vigil of the princes during the lying in state in Westminster Hall this week. The honour is normally reserved for working royals, which Harry and Andrew are not, as a result of Megxit and the Jeffrey Epstein scandal, respectively. But an exemption has been made for the Duke of York, who was forced to wear a suit for ceremonial events in Edinburgh yesterday as, quote, a special mark of respect. Both Andrew and Harry have been temporarily welcomed back into the fold following Queen Elizabeth's death and joined other senior members of the royal family, including King Charles, the Queen Consort, and the Prince and Princess of Wales, in welcoming Her Majesty's coffin at Buckingham Palace earlier tonight. So, Amanda Patel, what do you think? Duke of Sussex, he saw action during 2 tours of Afghanistan. Should he be able to wear his military uniform despite not being a working member of the royal family?
Absolutely and unutterably not. And my understanding is that the Prince Andrew is only allowed to wear his military uniform in the privacy of Buckingham Palace when it was just the family there, that he wasn't allowed to wear it outside of that. So basically the same rules apply for both of them in the public eye. That's all Harry cares about, is being filmed for Netflix wearing his uniform, looking really, really grand. You know, I think he's a disgrace. He's an utter disgrace. He has caused more pain to the Queen and to Prince Philip, the people he's supposed to love, God help you if he doesn't love you, than anyone since Diana did. And this whole thing has regurgitated a lot of things that we think about the damage that Harry's done and Meghan has done. But you've got to remember that everyone says Harry is so much like his mother Diana. And who was the one who did the Panorama interview and said that, remember, buried underneath there are 3 in this marriage and I will never be queen, I want to be the Queen of Hearts. She also said that Charles was not fit to be king. So she was sabotaging the royal family all that time back then, just as her son is sabotaging the royal family now. And the only difference is Harry and Meghan are making millions out of it, and it disgusts me. I wish they'd just get in a plane and go home.
Amanda Patel, she's not holding back tonight. This is why we love her, of course. John Sargent, what do you think? Should Prince Harry be able to wear his uniform?
I just think the whole thing, the whole Harry-Meghan thing is something I just love to see just disappear. So, I mean, I would never, ever be asked again, should Harry wear this or do that? You think, Harry, who's that? That's what I'd like the position to be. We've heard
Dream on, John.
I know. We've heard far too much about them. And, of course, we did like them. We liked her so much. That was what caused the problem. Everybody was crazy about her, and they were very upset when it turned out that they were, in fact, agents of they were just acting against the interests of the royal family, and they still are. But as far as Prince Andrew is concerned, why can't he realise what he's done and how he's lucky to be sort of allowed to walk the streets, really, without people shouting at him? I mean, this is really very, very serious. Millions of pounds he's been forced to spend.
Well, the Queen did, didn't she?
The Queen may have given it to him, but the idea that everything should be the same and he must be allowed to do what he wants to do and he must be allowed to look important. Well, why? Why?
But did you notice when the 4 children were standing on the sides of the Queen's coffin, they had, and all the pictures had Charles at the front, Princess Anne on the left, Edward on the right, and Andrew's bald head at the back. That's what they think of him.
Yeah.
But this is, honestly, I feel like somebody needs to super nanny these
You disagree, don't you? You actually think Prince Harry should be allowed to?
I think there should be one rule for everybody. I don't think you can say, you naughty, can wear one, you, naughty, can't wear one. I also think the idea that these silly little children want to wear their costumes in the house. This is like when I wasn't allowed to wear my ballet tutu to go to Sainsbury's as a child.
That's cruel. That's child cruelty.
Pathetic. That was child cruelty, you're right. If they are being so silly and naughty, and I want to smack their little heads together and say, somebody important has died, grow up and behave yourselves, you nasty children. Everybody wear a suit. It doesn't matter what you wear. It's not important. It's not about you. Just put on a dark suit and stop behaving like a little brat.
But Prince Harry is worth
But they both are.
He's worth less to
them,
Netflix
though.
in a suit than he is in military uniform.
But
that's all it's
I
about.
would say, of the two, I know that the Queen maybe felt differently, but in terms of actual moral crimes, I think probably Prince Andrew is worse than Prince Harry by quite some margin.
Allegedly.
Hanging out with Epstein, naughtier than being a show-off drama queen with Meghan Markle.
Naughtier, shocking.
Really, really.
Yeah, but Harry's
and of course I agree with that. But John, obviously they did serve. That's the irony, isn't it?
Well, that is.
Andrew, you cannot take it away from him his service in the Falklands. Harry, you cannot take away the service in Afghanistan.
No, but you know, when people are up before a court-martial, they often strip them of their uniform.
Good point, John.
Bang. You're out. You've broken the rules. Not whatever, because you served years ago, you will forever be in our hearts. No, you're not necessarily, no. Have you continued to serve and have you continued to do your duty?
And a lot of people...
In the case of these two, they haven't.
A lot of people leave the army and have nothing. These are two very rich men with nice houses and privileged lives, and I honestly think the idea that they feel hard done by because they can't wear something with tassels on it is laughable.
And fantastic that Prince Charles is the one who's implemented this and said, I'm not having it, and there'll be a lot more of that to come from Charles, which is one of the other reasons we like him so much. Did I call him
he's
Prince?
laying down the law, isn't he? Because, of course, after Prince Philip's funeral, there was... Oh, sorry, we're all doing that. But after Prince Philip's funeral, there was this weird compromise made, wasn't there, where they all decided to wear mourning suit. But, no, you're right. He is laying down the law, and my superstar panel laid down the law tonight. Thank you so much for joining us to pay tribute. Amanda Patel, John Sargent and Rebecca Reed. But the Poet Laureate, Simon Armitage, has written a beautiful verse in tribute to our late Queen, titled Floral Tribute. It is written through the metaphor of the lily of the valley, one of the late Queen's favourite flowers. Also, the first letter of each line spells out Elizabeth. Very clever. Listen.
Evening will come, however determined the late afternoon. Limes and oaks in their last green flush, pearled in September mist. I have conjured a lily to light these hours, a token of thanks, zones and auras of soft glare framing the brilliant globes. A promise made and kept, that was your gift, because of which here is a gift in return, glovewort to some, each shining bonnet guarded by stern lance-like leaves. The country loaded its whole self onto your slender hands, hands that can rest now, relieved of a century's weight. Evening has come. Rain on the black locks and dark Munros. Lily of the valley, a namesake almost, a favourite flower interlaced with your famous bouquets, the restrained zeal and forceful grace of its lanterns, each inflorescence a silent bell disguising a singular voice. A blurred new day breaks uncrowned on remote peaks and public parks, and everything turns on these luminous petals and deep roots, this lily that thrives between spire and tree, whose brightness holds and glows beyond the life and border of its bloom.
Absolutely beautiful stuff. Now, when King Charles III made his first speech as the new monarch, it was this declaration that was particularly significant. He said, "My life will of course change as I take up my new responsibilities. It will no longer be possible for me to give so much of my time and energies to the charities and issues for which I care so deeply." Of course, the King has a history of involving himself in thorny political issues, including his outspoken views on climate change and a recent remark that the government's Rwanda migration plan was, quote, appalling. It's because of these missteps that the Star Daily Mail columnist Stephen Glover had his concerns about King Charles's potential reign. But 5 days into this new era, Stephen writes in a new column that the king not only looks the part, but that he's sending out all the right signals when it comes to ruling apolitically. And I'm delighted to say that Stephen joins me now to talk us through his newfound optimism. Now, Stephen, I actually completely agree with you. I've been a big critic of Prince Charles when he's waded into lots of political issues in the past, including very recently when we had all of the stories about the money and the Fortnum and Mason bags and the criticism of the Rwanda plan. However, it's funny, isn't it? Something's changed these past 5 days. Do you think we're being a little bit naive, or is there a fundamental change now that he has transitioned from the Prince of Wales to king?
Well, I think there is a fundamental change.
Oh no, we've just lost Stephen Glover. We will try and get him back, but while... Oh, he's back. Sorry, Stephen. I think we've got you back now.
Yeah,
Crack on, Stephen.
That, I think there probably is a fundamental change. I think he knows. He knows that... he said back in 2018 that he would no longer be a meddling king. Or he would not be a meddling king when he became king. And I think he really wants not to be a meddling king and not to be divisive, not to be political. And that's all fine. And obviously in the last few days anyway, he hasn't had the opportunity to be political because he is grieving for his mother and he's trying to pull the nation together. And that's all great. And he hasn't put a foot wrong. The question is 6 months out, a year out, is he going to stick to that? And I very much hope he does, because if he starts, I agree with a lot of what Prince Charles says about lots of things, about architecture, for example. And I agree with 90% of what he says about the ugliness of modern architecture. But if I agree with him, somebody else down the road doesn't agree with him. And so it is with climate change. And so he must not do that. And I think he's going to try, but he is so opinionated that he may find it difficult. And I hope very, very much that he gets the better of his instincts and goes on being neutral and non-partisan.
Yeah, it is going to be difficult for him, isn't it, Stephen, because there's going to be so much temptation. So I'll give you the example from Saturday afternoon, and we can talk about this because it was actually filmed by the cameras who were in the room with King Charles. But the Liberal Democrat leader, Ed Davey, was there. And, of course, he was a former Energy and Climate Change Secretary from 2012 to 2015. And there was a fascinating exchange where the King said, "Oh, I haven't seen you for far too long," to Ed Davey. And then Ed Davey replied to the King, "I would love to come to talk to you about similar issues on the environment and climate change in due course." Now, we don't know what the King replied, but I would hope his reply to Mr. Davey would be, "No, I'm now the King. That's not appropriate for me to have that sort of discussion with you."
Well, that's right. Of course, Davey is the man who above everybody else, killed off fracking, which I think is going to be, or has been, a disaster. I hope that's quickly reversed. Yeah, I think Davey was, King Charles was probably being polite to this guy. And this guy would obviously like to get in there as soon as possible and persuade the king to back his causes. And I very much hope that King Charles just says, "It's no longer for me. I can't have an opinion on this. It's just not for me as the monarch." I think it's really important, and not just on climate change, but on lots of other issues as well. You must stick to that. Otherwise, there's going to be such trouble ahead.
But, Stephen, you have a lot of optimism, don't you? Why? What's changed these past 5 days?
Well, I have optimism because I think that what we've seen in the last 5 days is not just grieving for the Queen. That's what it is, obviously, in large measure, but also a respect for the monarchy. And I think the Queen has left the monarchy in an incredibly good state. And I think that anybody would have to get things incredibly badly wrong to turn public opinion against the monarchy. That's not to say it couldn't happen at some stage in the future, but I don't think Charles is a fool. And I think Charles will build on the legacy which his mother has left him. And that is an incredible legacy. So that makes me optimistic, because I think that the country is with him, and things would have to go enormously wrong for that to change.
I think you're so right. The real difference is we want him to succeed now, don't we? We don't want him to fall flat on his face. We want him to live up to those very important pledges that he made in the King's speech on Friday night. And I think, Stephen, for me, it actually was that address to the nation where I changed my mind, because I was convinced by his promises. And I know how seriously Queen Elizabeth II took her promises to the nation, and I think Charles will do the same. And he promised that he will no longer be a campaigning member of the royal family.
Yeah, and he stepped back from his charities, which have got him into some trouble. I mean, obviously charities were, great to have charities, but they got him into some trouble. Yeah, I hope very much, and I think, I would be surprised if he goes back to his old opinionated, intervening, rather meddling self as Prince. I'll be very surprised, I think, if that happens. I think he's really going to try to rule as a non-partisan monarch, and that's what will make him popular and loved if he does that.
Daily Mail columnist Stephen Glover, so great to talk to you. Thank you so much. I want to turn now again to my superstar panel, Amanda Patel, John Sargent and Rebecca Reid. And Amanda, I just wanted to end by asking you about how you felt these past few days, because of course you were on holiday when you learnt the news of the Queen's passing. So much has happened over that 7 days, given that it was only this time last week that the Queen welcomed Liz Truss as the new Prime Minister. Now she lies behind me in her coffin in Buckingham Palace for the last time. How have you emotionally coped with these seismic events, Amanda?
Dan, I felt desperately sad. I think, like many people, I was not quite prepared for the level of sadness I felt. I mean, I just wanted to cry. I wanted to cry like I cried when my own parents died. But there was something much more epic than that, something that, even watching it today, I had to turn the TV set off an hour before I put my makeup on because my eyes were so red. But, it's also been a kind of exquisite beauty about it all. And even today, it was so weird when the Queen was leaving, well, I keep getting lost now which bit. There was another sunbeam that came down on her car. There was a double sunbeam that came down. And it's just like this incredible story. You see Charles and Camilla in that incredibly beautiful sermon, and the Archbishop spoke so beautifully. And at one point, Camilla nudged, I was going to just nudge John then, but Camilla nudged him. She put her hand on his arm, and I couldn't tell whether his head was dropped through sorrow or exhaustion, and I could understand both. It's been, look, we're only a bit through this drama and the emotions we're going to feel.
And John Sargent, let's look ahead to tomorrow, because we've obviously seen many historic scenes over the past 5 days. But that procession of the Queen's coffin from behind me at Buckingham Palace to Westminster Hall, with her family following on foot, it's going to be quite something, isn't it, John?
It is going to be something. And of course, what's going to be, I think, for lots of people, particularly people who live in London, who know all what's happened in the past in London, they'll be able to compare it and think, but this is completely different. Yeah. It's a much, much bigger order. And I think that comparison, which we couldn't get really in Edinburgh or Belfast, but we will get it in London, our capital, and how is our capital going to react? And I think people will think, goodness me, this is absolutely amazing. And I think that'll be the overriding impression.
Rebecca Reid, final word to you.
I think I feel similarly to Amanda, very surprised by how sad I feel. It's really made me miss my grandmother. And I think the real privilege has been to be working in the media over the last week, because it means that you get to be with people and talk about it and process it. And I would urge anybody who's also feeling confused by their sadness to find people, have a glass of wine and have a chat, because it does seem to be making it all feel a little bit lighter.
Rebecca Reid, John Sargent, Amanda Patel, my fabulous superstar panel. Absolutely, I feel like we're getting each other through these incredible days, aren't we? And Really interesting you say it, Rebecca. I've thought so much of my own grandparents, especially my grandmas, the past 5 days, because for me, they were a representation of the Queen, that greatest generation, and losing them from our life is just such a tragedy. But thank you so much. Thank you to all of my guests tonight, and of course for you at home. We are live from Buckingham Palace, and we will be back tomorrow night again from 9 p.m. until 11 p.m. I'd love to hear from you. Do share your memories of the Queen at GBNews on Twitter, and you can email me to dan@gbnews.uk. Now it's going to be Mark Dolan who is taking over after midnight with the Headliners crew. But before all of that, the news with Simon Pusey. Good.
Hello, I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. King Charles III will be joined by his sons on the walk behind the Queen's coffin tomorrow to where the Queen will lie in state. Princes William and Harry, along with the Duke of York, Princess Royal and Earl of Wessex, will follow the coffin on foot from Buckingham Palace to the Palace of Westminster. The procession through central London will leave the palace at 2:22 p.m. and is expected to arrive at Westminster Hall at 3 p.m. Meanwhile, the government's route of the queue to the Queen's lying in state at Westminster Hall has been published. The line, which will be managed by over 1,000 volunteers and police officers, will follow the path of the River Thames and could stretch all the way to southeast London. The lying in state opens to the public at 5 p.m. tomorrow and will be accessible 24 hours a day until the morning of the Queen's funeral on Monday. Well, earlier, the Queen's coffin arrived to cheers from the public at Buckingham Palace, where it will remain overnight in the palace's bow room. King Charles and his Queen consort were joined for the arrival by other members of the royal family, including the Prince and Princess of Wales and Duke and Duchess of Sussex. The state hearse has been designed in consultation with the late monarch to give mourners a clear view of the coffin, which has been lying in rest in Edinburgh. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon said Scotland has bid a final farewell to our much-loved Queen of Scots. King Charles and the Queen consort have left Buckingham Palace following the arrival of the Queen's cortege. The royal couple have been in Belfast meeting the Northern Ireland Assembly and taking part in a service of prayer and reflection at St Anne's Cathedral. Meanwhile, the Princess Royal, who's accompanied the Queen's coffin on its flight from Scotland to London, has called it an honour and a privilege to accompany her late mother on her final journeys. Meanwhile, in other news, the family of the man fatally shot by police last week are asking to be shown video footage of his final moments. 24-year-old Chris Cabber, who was unarmed, was killed during a police pursuit after they deliberately crashed into his car to stop the vehicle. One shot was fired from a police weapon. A firearms officer has now been suspended. The Independent Office for Police Conduct has opened a homicide investigation, and London Mayor Sadiq Khan has said due process must be followed.
There's an independent police investigation from the independent police watchdog. They will go wherever the evidence is. They decided there should be a homicide investigation, and I support that. But the new commissioner has made a really important decision, which is to suspend the officer, and I fully support that. And we've got to give them the time to do their investigation properly, because how would the family and others feel if that investigation couldn't happen properly because of a speed in making sure they get answers sooner rather than later?
Sadiq Khan there. The Ukraine president says his country is now in full control of more than 4,000 square metres of territory, having recaptured it from Russian forces. President Volodymyr Zelensky has also said his armed forces are attempting to secure an additional 4,000 square metres. Meanwhile, Ukraine has restored two main power lines supplying the eastern city of Kharkiv after Russian shelling caused blackouts, whilst the three backup power lines at the Russian-held Zaporizhia nuclear power plant have also been restored. TV, online and DAB